Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I want instead to talk about a story that you may be a little bit cross with me for not discussing more. I've had my fingers burnt on it, in a way. The deep and actually, the producer's looking at me as if I've gone mad. We've talked about it loads, haven't we? The idea, but I think when it was the Westminster paedophile scandal that was in the news so much, I think I talked about it even more than I'm talking about the footballing one. But the Westminster paedophile scandal has been undermined somewhat by very strong suggestions that a key witness, a key accuser, the man called Nick, who was essentially looked after by the Exero News website, now defunct, and I went all in support of that website and all in support of police officers who believed it was really important to tell victims that they would be believed. So if one crucial, key, absolutely categorical witness turns out, as seems likely, and I have to choose my words so carefully, you're going to upset everyone with a conversation like this, to have not been acting in good faith, then it's a tragedy on an almost uncontemplatable scale, because it colours everybody who is telling the truth, and it gives so much ammunition to all those people who even think that a conversation about fantasists or compensation has any place in a proper consideration of child sexual abuse, crimes against children. So, you know, we are where we are, and whether or not that passion, that public feeling, that public appetite for justice would have been sustained better if it wasn't for that one witness being so roundly curtailed and criticised, I do not know. But and this, again, I'm having a strange show today. A lot of you are saying, James, I've agreed with you 2 out of 2 today. What the hell is going on? Well, I've turned my brain off, so if you find yourself agreeing with me 2 out of 2, it's probably time to have a good look in the mirror. I've turned my brain off on the first 2, or certainly on the second one. I'm not turning it off on the third one. I have a conversation about these football professionals who've come forward to describe the abuse that they suffered as younger boys, as children. But I do wonder really whether or not the public, whether there's something about this country that means they won't get justice either. Matt Letitia is the latest to come forward, a household name footballer who spent his entire career at Southampton despite having suffered what he describes in the media today as a deeply unpleasant experience at the hands of a former coach accused by several former players of abusing them. He was subjected to what he describes somewhat euphemistically as a naked massage. And if you went to an all-boys boarding school, as I did, you'll have a couple of teachers. In fact, you didn't even have to go to an all-boys boarding school, did you? Everyone from their own youths and childhoods will have a couple of faces popping up in their brains at this point who possibly never laid a finger on you, but were kind of suspected of doing things like naked massages or having a slightly odd attitude to shower supervision, or all of these things. And do you know, my friends, I think that's why I'm losing faith in justice on this issue, just because it's so huge and so common. And I hope that doesn't sound contradictory or counterintuitive. What I mean is, you take any individual person who doesn't have a paedophilic tendency in their body, right, and you ask them what should happen to a child abuser, and they say, string them up from the nearest lamppost, I'll do it myself. We'd all say that, right? Almost all of us would say that. And then, of course, we return to the territory we just explored for an hour with regard to the rule of law and proper evidence and civilization. But generally speaking, it's a figure of speech. Lock them up, throw away the key, right? We'd all probably agree about that. And then reality intrudes. So an old mate of mine, one of my former bosses, wrote a piece for an Irish newspaper about the abuse he suffered from the Christian Brothers, which was, you know, hands down the trousers, inappropriate. He wrote a piece about it never did me any harm. In fact, I'd rather get groped than beaten, because as a pupil of the Christian Brothers, you'd get thrashed as regularly as you'd get groped. And he said the groping never did me or my mates any harm. And I sort of almost want to shake him by the scruff of his neck and say, well, it might not have done you any harm, but A, you don't know that because you're a bit of a dog, and you might not have been if you hadn't had sexual abuse at a very young age. And B, how do you know all your mates haven't spent their lives in the shadows and in pieces and in fear, like some of these incredibly brave footballers coming forward to describe the abuse that they suffered? So there might well be some former Southampton apprentices listening to this now thinking, oh yeah, I had the naked massages as well, never did me any harm. I don't know what Letizier's getting his knickers in such a twist about. And that's the point, isn't it, is it affects everybody differently. And then what if you were never touched by that guy? You didn't even know about the naked massage rumours, but he was responsible for putting you on the path to the Premiership. How do you feel now about him specifically? He's still the bloke that put me on the path to the Premiership. And that's why I don't know how a country or a society actually galvanises itself, motivates itself in a way sufficient to ensure that every single stone gets looked under. Then you've got the really dodgy stuff in the British media, which is the people who seem to resent the fact that investigations are undertaken and victims are listened to at all. That's what you could loosely describe as the "and Jimmy Savile is still dead" school of thought, where they do seem to think that anybody coming forward from the past with an allegation of sex crime against an adult, a prominent, powerful adult, must in some way be treated with derision, suspicion, and doubt. That is the one thing from the right-wing media this year, and all the madness that's unfolded this year, the one thing I really can't get my head around is what you might describe as the "and Jimmy Savile is still dead" school of thought, as if that somehow means we shouldn't be investigating. So that's what one of the football coaches accused in the papers yesterday is dead. Does that mean we should just say to the men coming forward, finding the courage to come forward to describe what happened to that, "Oh, shut up and go away, he's dead now"? Just get over. I mean, it truly is baffling, right? Even to people who possibly don't get as upset and as cross about this issue as I do. It's utterly baffling, right? Anyway. So the latest is Matt Le Tissier, and the number of men who've come forward now is well into the hundreds. It is astonishing, really, how many people have spoken of being abused, and some of them have gone into fairly graphic detail. Ian Dale has been carrying some great investigative work from one of my colleagues here, James Davis, who has been speaking to victims from one London club, and it seems really to have been unfolding in every club in the country. And my question for you is this, and I really don't want to ask you this, I really don't want to ask you this, because it's almost as if by asking it, you just make it slightly more likely that it will come true. Do you think it's just so huge that we're never going to know the truth? 0345 606 0973. So I used to think, oh yes, I'll get on my high horse about this one because of that bar steward who abused my friends at prep school, and the small number of people who will be voiceless and silent. They need a voice, and crusading. But actually, the reason why it doesn't work is because it's gone on everywhere. And if it was your dad that had done it, or your uncle, or your favourite coach, would you really go all in on getting it all exposed? Would you really be marching around, whether it's the Dell in Southampton, as it would have been back then, whether it's whether it's Loftus Road, wherever it is, would you really be marching around there like you'd march around the Palace of Westminster with a full beam torch and shining it into every single corner and quizzing everybody and interrogating everybody about what they knew? Because I would. Until I remember a couple of the monks at my school who got done. One of whom I was very fond of. I had no idea. See, I can get myself in a right old rage about Mr. O'Brien in the dark room at the school I attended between the ages of 7 and 13. And I can absolutely applaud the fact that he's in jail at the moment. But then I remember a monk I was taught by when I was older, who was convicted of a much less serious offence some years after I left the school, and he is now dead. But I still harbour affection for him. Of a sort. I still think of him in the terms of his interactions with me, not in terms of his interaction with anybody else. And there are loyalties as well, Loyalties involved in this. Okay, so it turns out some people have been making some accusations against him, and he was the first team coach when I was the youth team coach, but he's the one that got me promoted, and he's the one who really, without whom I wouldn't have a career, and most of these kids don't seem to have been that upset by it, so maybe I won't actually cooperate fully with the police when they come calling, because I'm married to his daughter. Do you see what I mean? See, what I do is I try to work out why things aren't unfolding in the way that I want them to. And you're left with two conclusions when it comes to institutional child sex abuse, right? Either there are some sinister puppet masters who are sitting at the very top of society, closing down investigations, paying people to tell lies. They've got the journalists in their pockets. And whether they're all paedophiles or not, I do not know. But they're deliberately conspiring to ensure that these poor children never, ever see justice. And they're pressing their buttons and pulling their strings and closing their doors and briefing their journalists. Or it's actually not sinister or organised at all. And it's all about people like us. So you come in here and talk to me about Jimmy Savile, that's fine. But talk to me about the teacher at school that you really liked, but he's turned out to have been abusing other children when you were there but didn't know. Are you still going to feel as disgusted and as outraged as you do about Jimmy Savile? And football is an incredibly closely knit community, more than anything else, actually, in Britain, much more than showbiz. Everybody knows everybody in the world of football, which makes me want to be wrong again. Because I hope that the fact that people like Matthew Le Tissier, God bless your soul, sir, people like Matthew Le Tissier are finding the confidence to come forward and describe what happened to them, genuine household names, which the first round of victims were not, unless you follow football very closely. I kind of have this optimism that the sheer scale of their, I don't want to say celebrity, it sounds too cheap for a conversation like this, but they're so well known that you can't just switch out the light, close the door and tell everybody to move along because Jimmy Savile is still dead. Footballers will change everything, I hope. Because the profile they enjoy and the profile the sport enjoys is so huge, we won't look away like we did with the politicians. But then I just wonder whether actually it's not about the abusers or the abused, it's about the rest of us. And whether or not we can sustain an appetite to see these men hauled over the coals and hauled through courts when there'll be lots of people in every single one of these clubs who still like them. Sorry, I haven't asked you a question, have I? Do you just want to talk to me about this? I hope so. Otherwise, it's going to be a very lonely 30 minutes until Theo Usherwood turns up to talk us through what's happened at PMQs this afternoon. Call me now and tell me, how much faith have you got with or in the prospect of justice for these brave men who have come forward? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Do you think this time it will happen? And if not, why not? If you do, what's different? Why would football somehow be the scandal to break the dam of institutional child sex abuse? I don't know, but I hope you do. And I haven't got the right question yet on this. No, not just today, but historically. The child sex abuse, you can rail against people who've been accused, but you can't do it until they've been convicted. A lot of them haven't been convicted. Some men have had their lives ruined by allegations that currently appear to have been false. So how do you get the question right in a way that all of us care, all of us want progress? Many of us fear we'll never see it. Why? Because it seems the more you discuss these things, the huger it is. Is it so huge that well, okay, here's a question, and this involves everybody. How would you do it? How should this, because the FA are going to investigate it, for heaven's sake. And the FA can barely tie their own shoelaces. I heard their chief exec, Greg Clark, he was asked about compensation, which isn't a question you should be asking first, but I can only control what goes on my show every morning. I can't control what every other journalist in the country does. It's probably just as well. He says, it'd be awful if there was a lot of compensation. Every pound that we paid out in compensation would be a pound taken away from providing AstroTurf pitches for the most underprivileged people, underprivileged football players in the country. And you sort of think, hey, hang on a minute, what about just slashing the wages of everybody in the FA? Why does it have to come straight out of the funds that are spent on football pitches for poor people? So I don't trust them to investigate it any more than I trusted the Conservative Party to investigate allegations against Conservative MPs, or the Liberals to investigate allegations against Cyril Smith and people like that. I don't know what should happen. You say, we should have a judge-led inquiry. Yeah, we've tried that. It's on to its fourth head now. Mark's in Leighton. Mark, what made you pick up the phone, mate?
Yeah, good afternoon, James. Two things. My son is currently a player at Southampton. He's an older player. He's sort of knocking on the door at the moment, first team. But they, from my point of view, and we've been there quite a long time, they have tightened up so much on anything to do with welfare of their players and the children under their care. I don't really have any worries about how they are at the moment.
No, and that's not really something I would want you to have or be particularly concerned about, given how much society has changed, let alone Southampton Football Club. But my fear today is that there'll still be people in the setup who were there when there was dodgy stuff going on, and a proper investigation into the dodgy stuff is going to implicate all of them, guilty or not, because doing nothing makes you guilty in the modern view of child abuse, in my view rightly, but it didn't used to. So how do you investigate properly without actually seeing lots of people who weren't involved get punished or get outed as not having done enough at the time? Oh, we all knew the rumours. That's the line. We all knew well, why the bloody hell didn't you do anything then? And that's why they won't investigate.
Well, you're completely right. I think the point you made earlier on about football being very insular,
yes,
and everyone knows everyone, and it is true. But also, clubs have a very high turnover of staff.
Yes.
There are only one or two people that have been there for such a long time. You know, they are part of the woodwork almost. And I believe that what you've said is correct. I think that if it was in my point of view, and I heard a rumour of something or other, I would probably approach a senior member of staff and say, look, this is perhaps, way out of my remit, but I've just heard this.
You might now in the 21st century, but back in the 70s you wouldn't have done.
No, because people hushed it up and it all went under the carpet.
And people didn't care as much. People didn't care as much. They didn't offend people as much. There were jokes about it.
No, kids were not in the forefront of people's minds like they are now. The relationship we have with our children at home or at work or at school or in these clubs or wherever it may be, in the institutions that seem to be throwing blankets over all the information,
yes,
is very, very different. Our kids are the most important thing to us now. Back in the 70s, you were seen and not heard still, and you were sort of, I'm in 1966 I was born, so, we weren't treated the same. We were not treated the same as our kids now,
Absolutely, it's a good point. For good or for ill, I sometimes think we put too much effort and attention into their welfare and end up giving them all these anxieties that young people today seem to be developing. But that's it, isn't it? And how do you fix that then? Because my friend Tom Perry of the Mandate Now organisation, who was on with Andrew Castle a couple of weeks ago, he's got brilliant ideas about how you would prevent a repetition of what happened back then. The idea that you have a mandatory reporting system in place. The NSPCC have made a complete pig's ear of it, but you can't have it retrospectively. You can't have the teachers at my school who maybe heard the rumours about what Mr. O'Brien was getting up to in the dark room and didn't do anything about them. They're not going to cooperate with a full investigation because it involves them saying, yep, sorry, my bad, I dropped that one. Should probably have done something, but I didn't. So how do you ever investigate properly?
That's incredibly difficult.
Isn't it?
I think that with historical stuff, people had got to almost tarnish their own reputation
Bingo.
to get to the person that they really need to get to.
Bingo.
And I don't think there's many people that are going to do that.
Not just tarnish your own reputation, but tarnish the reputations of people you love and respect and owe your entire career to. And that's going to be more relevant in the context of football than it is in almost any other field.
Which is why the footballers that have come forward have been so brave.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They've made an enormous step and helped, unwittingly probably in most circumstances, they've helped so many other players to realise and come forward.
And it does make you feel better to come forward and to tell people what happened to you. Ideally, you get justice at the end of it, but even being listened to makes you feel better.
Listened to is the big one. You could underline that twice. I don't even think the justice thing will, unluckily for them, there might only be one or two that possibly get what they consider to be justice.
And a lot of them will already be dead, but it's not about them, it's about the victims.
No. It's about the survivors. Yeah,
I think so, mate. That's it's a big year for you then. This one, the big 5-0.
Yes, yeah. I've had my 5-0 already, unfortunately.
Still sounding very sprightly, Mark. Still sounding very sprightly. Good luck to your boy down at Southampton as well. It's 27 minutes after 12, and that's the thing. I think so slowly, like in the darkness, moving towards the light. That's what my problem is. That's what my fear is. That it's yeah, okay, he was a bit of a pervert. Everybody knew it. We're trying to apply 21st century mores and sensibilities to, borderline 19th century behaviour. and or 19th century crimes. That's why you can still name the swimming coach or the PE teacher or the scoutmaster who had a bit of a reputation. Whether he ever laid a finger on you or not, you can still name him now. Or Pervy Peters, you know? That's why. And so if you really want to get to the bottom of it, a lot of people are going to have to say, I could have done something and I didn't. And we are humans, most of us. We are humans. And we don't really like doing that. I could have done something and I didn't. And I beat myself up about not doing more at prep school when I was 12 years old. 12 years old? Should have done more, mate. 12? How are you going to feel if you were 30 or 40 and you feel you could have done more? Too ashamed to come forward. And then there's the other element of it, and this is where some of the stories about the politicians and the Official Secrets Act and investigations being dropped after arrests speak to me of the security services being involved. Do you remember that clip? I thought we were going to change the world a couple of years ago. We dug out an old clip of an old whip, dead now, Conservative whip, effectively saying on camera, can't remember who found it, brought it to me, and we played it out. I said, of course, if the Conservative whip, chief whip, or worked in the whip's office, I can't remember. I'll remember his name before 12:45. Of course, if you got into trouble with small boys or something like that, and we became aware of it, then we'd be able to use that information to influence your vote, to lean on you a little and make sure you voted in the way that the party leadership wanted.
Anyone with any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth. They'd say, no, I'm in a jam, can you help? It might be debt, it might be scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal which a member seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help. And if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we can get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
That's the attitude of the 1970s. There is a paedophile child abuser. Oh, splendid. We'll use that to get him to vote the way we want him to vote. Hey, what do you think MI5 are going to do with it? Grim reading, I've got to be honest with you. We'll start with Josh, who's in the West Midlands. He writes that football is an industry that will let almost anything go as long as you're good at the game. As we've seen with recent cases, you can commit an offence that's usually career-ending. He means in other careers, but in football you'll get a second, a third, even a fourth charge. Rape, drink driving, shooting someone with an air rifle. So, if you were a good scout or a good coach who abused young players, there's a high chance that clubs would have ignored it because of their desperate pursuit of winning. Being the best, finding the best. If you're really good at that, you can do almost anything you want. That's issue one. The other is the white male angle, James. It must be difficult for some in the media right now who are reporting on nationwide sexual abuse that was covered up and ignored for generations. All facilitated, encouraged and continuously committed by white men. Not brown-skinned foreigners or Muslim taxi drivers in Rotherham. The same as the BBC abuse cover-up, the Catholic Church cover-up. White males. But as with any crime, it's different if they do it. It's worse. It's them who do this. It's in their culture, not ours. How long can the media ignore the truth that they've always uncovered? That the UK might actually have a very real issue with white male child abusers. And Julie in Suffolk points out that people who groom are by their very nature charming and plausible. It's part of the manipulation. They rely on the warm feelings of others to discredit any allegations. Man, it really goes on. Some fascinating tweets and texts coming in. I'm going to take a couple of calls and then return to some of them. John is in St Albans. John, what made you pick up the phone?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, mate.
It was what you said about how you felt about your favourite swimming teacher, monk at school, whatever it is. Well, I used to work in rock and roll. I was a roadie. And I went on tour twice with Gary Glitter.
Blimey.
Well, yeah, exactly. And when it first broke, we just finished the tour. He used to do these Christmas tours every year. And I have to say, he was a bit strange. But he wasn't Nicky Six from Motley Crue or Izzy Stradlin or anybody like that. He was just a bit odd.
Yeah.
But he was funny. And then he pleaded guilty to having the images on his computer.
That's right.
And you couldn't believe it. It was like, actually, I quite liked him.
Yeah.
And then he got banged away in Cambodia, and now he's banged away again. And you feel, well, not betrayed, but I can understand how these people feel that this bloke who was my favourite swimming teacher, football coach, because this bloke who I not only worked for, we used to go out for meals and stuff. He'd treat the crew and everything. He was really kind.
Well, they groom everybody. They groom everybody. They groom everybody. Sure. That's the point.
Sure, yeah, sure. Everybody is susceptible to the power and influence which they like to exploit over other people.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And that makes me worry. I mean, Gary Glitter's a good example because he got completely caught, as it were. But I wonder whether his eccentric nature and his slightly sort of freakish demeanour almost made him into some sort of sacrificial lamb. We'll throw Gary Glitter to the authorities. Well, I say we. I don't know if it's ever that cynical, but we'll go after Gary Glitter because he is strange. Whereas that point Josh made a minute ago about white males, we don't want to go after people who are like us. We'll go Jimmy Savile, weird and dead. We can go all in on Jimmy Savile, but I don't want to go all in on someone who might still be popular and still be held in high affection by the public. Look what happened when they thought Cliff Richard might have done something wrong. How did the media react to that? It's a crazy thing. His phone line's gone. I don't know if he wants to come back on. He can if he does, but I could tell the phone was fading out. Rob's in Slough. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. James, you posed the question earlier on in the programme whether or not this was a tight global web.
Well, certainly national. I don't know that I went as far as suggesting global, but you can if you want.
Well, this is the question I want to ask you. Is can we now assume, because I don't think people are taking this seriously enough, can we now assume this is endemic in society? We've got the entertainment industry, we've got Westminster, we've got Rotherham, we've got politicians all over the world, we've now got football. Can we not now assume?
Yeah, well, we can, but I mean, I see the Rotherham scandal as being of a different nature because the girls raped and abused up there were groomed in a way that made them think that their abusers were their boyfriends or something like that, and they were
apparently, we don't know, do we?
Well, I've read the J report into it actually a couple of times, and that's a fairly, it's a statement I can make with a fair degree of confidence. There are also exceptions, but using the camouflage of an institution, I think, is what the unifying theme is. The camouflage of the church or the world of show business or the world of football, or using somehow that position of authority over children to abuse them. And that is a network.
And that's coming back to your this tight web you were talking about. And I think these people in these circles are almost pushed. Savile may have been pushed to where he was by other people in these circles. I mean, I had a proper ding-dong with a few people over the John Podesta Pizzagate scandal recently.
God, for people not familiar with this was a fake news story that started on social media, inevitably, suggesting that Hillary Clinton's closest advisor was somehow running a paedophile ring from a New York pizza parlour. A story that was spread, I think, by the guy who's just got the nod to be defence secretary, and if not by him, then certainly by his son. They're the kind of people in the White House now. And guess what happened at that pizza parlour a couple of days ago? Someone got shot. So that's what you're referring to.
Well, this is the ding-dong I had. And, okay, let's just assume that there may or may not have been, but the circumstantial evidence around it is so disturbing that it at least needs an investigation.
Oh, mate, you're mad. Sorry, I completely misunderstood you.
You're shutting the conversation down like you're just shutting the Savile conversation down. You shut the football conversation down. You shut down the church conversation.
Yeah.
You can't shut it down.
No.
Just because it doesn't.
And that's where we are now, is it? So but it doesn't fit my narrative. Oh, mate, that is really scary. You sounded sane. You sounded sane. So you think the guy who went in there with a gun looking for paedophiles actually had some grounds for doing what he did, Rob?
Hey, listen, all I want to know, and all anyone...
Forget it, mate. Seriously, that's where we are now. Everyone's gone mad. Absolutely everybody. Comparing a story invented by political enemies of Hillary Clinton to the stories being told by these young footballers coming forward. Sheesh. Colin's in Egham. Colin, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
hello there. It's really a story of the period. I mean, about 38 years ago, when we were about under 12 footballers, we had a manager of and at the end of it, he ended up getting locked up for being a paedophile. That was one thing. But in the start of it, I mean, I was quite lucky. I escaped it all, but we were around it all. But in the start of it, this guy started off. He would come out on his push bike with somebody else who also, I think, might have been arrested for it. And he'd be riding around the council estates, just pulling up, watching the boys playing football and cruising around like that. Then eventually he'd approach the mothers and, sign them up and try and develop a football club. And he was a single guy, nothing wrong with a single guy, and he lived with his mother in a council flat. And that's where eventually all the children used to get changed in his mother's.
You can see how it happens. You can see how it unfolds.
Yeah, it didn't get flagged up at the time.
And people had suspicions, right? But you just look the other.
Well, I'll carry on.
Yeah, sorry.
And so, if you had to, the thing about it is, I mean, there's sort of like in our area as a community of people, they call them like the Morris gang because we all played in this team. And it's sort of joked about, but it wouldn't have been funny for some,
That's the point.
That's the point. Ended up, because it all started off with a bit of fondling and play fighting and all this sort of thing. But I think because we were Kansas State kids, we were a bit streetwise, and some of them were probably quieter lads. And we think they're the ones who got abused because at the end of it, it ended up with the CRDs coming around our house, questioning us and asking all sorts of questions from our parents because there was a case going on. And during this time, he'd pick us up in a minibus on his own, takes off the pitches, play football. He had away days to things like Arsenal, and he'd be having little play fights on the train. He'd be pulling over in the minibus having play fights, groping the boys, this sort of thing. And he even had a nickname of Bummer Morris, and that was common amongst. So
that was the one I made up a minute ago, Pervy Peters. I mean, it was just normal, wasn't it? That's
what he was called,
and that's how they get away with it. I need you to be a little bit careful for legal reasons, because I don't want anyone to be identified.
Hard to go with that.
Yeah.
But that was of the period then, and all this going on, and there was no parents taking you to football. You went there on your own and come back on your own, and eventually, he obviously went too far with someone. And well,
he went too far with all of them, but you mean he went far enough to actually get caught? And that's why it happens, isn't it? Because because entire communities are groomed, and yet we sit here confused as the absence of justice and the absence of transparency.
I just think where during that period you could navigate through this without being caught, and it is very sly, obviously, how he spoke to people. And you'd have to.
All right, come here. Here's the killer question, mate, and you don't have to answer it. Did you like him?
Oh, at the time, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that is why. And there it is. That's very honest and brave of you. I admire you for that.
But one other thing, looking back on this, was if you take it now, when you think about it, we've all got children now. When you wake up in the morning, what is the first thing you think of?
Yeah.
Throughout the day, or
think about the little one.
That's all you think about. And then if you think in government nowadays, yeah, no, I'm right, just getting a drink of water. If you think in government nowadays, do you wake up in the morning thinking about the Ministry of Defence, unemployment, pension ministry, or anything like that? You don't. So why isn't there a proactive ministry that just thinks about what is the most important thing to everyone?
Because it's not important enough to enough people. It seems to be, and conversations like this mean that it is, but I mean, I hate to say it again, but you head onto social media and see how many people are tweeting constantly about the scandals in Rotherham and have never mentioned Westminster, never mentioned the Catholic Church, never mentioned the football scandals unfolding now. In fact, if you were to go into the box of trolls today, you'd probably find people convinced that the sex abuse in Rotherham is the end of civilization as we know it, but the footballers are coming forward because of compensation and fantasists. And that's why it happens. Because some people are so easily persuaded to go to war for wrongness.